He shot to national prominence in the 1990s with the Christian Coalition, and now Ralph Reed is back at it again with his Faith and Freedom Coalition, which is holding its conference here in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us, Ralph.
Thank you very much. Good to be with Newsmax.
How big a role will the Christian right play in the 2012 presidential elections, and how confident are you that Republicans will be able to recapture the White House?
Well, I'm certainly not overconfident. I think anytime you run it against an incumbent president who's going to have $1 billion Air Force One and every special interest in his back pocket and the entire force of the federal government, you're in for a tough race. But I'm of the view that in general, re-elections tend to be a referendum on a president's performance. And more specifically, historically, they're a referendum on a president's management and stewardship of the economy. And, we got a long way to go before this election. But right now, Barack Obama has a higher unemployment rate than any president who has stood for re-election since the Great Depression. And there's never been a president re-elected since the Depression where the unemployment rate was over 7.2%. Today it's 9.1%. He'd have to create 500,000 jobs every month between now and Election Day for him to fall below 7.2%, and I don't know that that's likely to happen. So I think Barack Obama is eminently beatable. In terms of the role of conservative people of faith, as I said earlier, it's 44% of the vote. There's no way to follow a road to the nomination without going through the toll booth that is the Tea Party vote and the social conservative vote, and there's huge overlap. So the truth is, it isn't an either or an or, it's both. And I don't think anybody's going to be the nominee who isn't persuaded the voters that they're pro-life and pro-family and pro-marriage, and that they take seriously the Tea Party's agenda.
Given the economy, who will be most influential in choosing the 2012 GOP presidential nominee, social conservatives or fiscal conservatives?
Well, I think it's unlikely to be an either or. We know from exit polling data that in 2008, 44% of all the voters in the Republican presidential primaries were social conservatives, mostly evangelicals, but also pro-family Roman Catholics. So, obviously, there's no way to ignore a vote that big, especially when in Iowa it's going to be between 55 and 60% of the vote. And in South Carolina, it's going to be between 50 and 55% of the vote. And there are 11 states that will hold primaries where social conservatives will be a majority of the entire vote. There are another 10 states where social conservatives will be between 1/3 and 50% of the vote. So it's a huge constituency. But what's different in 12 versus 08 is the Tea Party constituency. And they're concerned about debt, spending, the size and scope of government, and they don't want the United States to spend its way into oblivion the way Greece or Portugal have. So, and the thing you have to remember is there's a lot of overlap between those two groups. So half of all evangelicals are Tea Party activists, and about 2/3 of all Tea Party activists are social conservatives. So it's hard to disaggregate and say one rather than the other.
That election is 17 months away. Medicare, of course, now emerging as a huge issue. How important is it? Do you think the nation has a moral obligation to make sure that entitlement programs remain solvent?
Well, I think the federal government has a moral obligation to make sure that it keeps its word. And unfortunately, it has not kept its word on Medicare. Medicare is fiscally destined for bankruptcy. What Barack Obama is proposing is a 15-member panel of faceless, nameless bureaucrats who will unilaterally cut reimbursement rates to doctors, hospitals, and nursing homes, such that Obama's own Congressional Budget Office and his own Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services say that after they implement those cuts, 41% of all health care providers in America will no longer take Medicare. That leads to rationing, that leads to deep cuts, draconian cuts, and the fact that you can't find a doctor who will take Medicare.
Another topic entirely, Mitt Romney and Jon Huntsman. Can they overcome bias against their Mormon faith in the 2012 election?
I think so. I mean, I think It was a bigger issue in '08 because in '08, Romney was the first truly viable candidate for a presidential nomination who was a Mormon in either party. Now, you know, his father, George Romney, looked at it in '68 but didn't go. Mo Udall was a Mormon, and he ran for president, but he really didn't have a chance. Orrin Hatch ran for president, I guess, in 2000. He's Mormon, but he wasn't really a contender for the nomination. So Mitt Romney was the first really viable candidate for a nomination. So, you know, he had to be a path breaker and a trailblazer. But I think that's over, and I think both Mitt and John are highly unlikely to get nearly as many questions this time on that issue.
Finally, what do you think of the field of presidential candidates announced so far?
Well, I like them. I know a lot of them personally. In the case of Newt Gingrich, we've been friends for 30 years. In the case of a number of others, more recently. But I think between you know, what Mitt Romney, John Huntsman, and Tim Pawlenty have accomplished as governors, to, if she runs, what Michelle Bachmann has accomplished in terms of electrifying the grassroots, Newt Gingrich being a former speaker. You know, there's really some very strong candidates there. And I think if whoever wins this nomination, it will be in a very competitive race with Barack Obama unless the economy really turns around strongly, which I don't anticipate.
You'd like to see Jim DeMint get in it?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think it's a free country, and I'd like to see a lot of people get into it. I would have liked to have seen Mitch Daniels, would still like to see Sarah Palin. I wish Donald Trump had stayed in.
Mike Pence.
Yeah, but I'm a little selfish in that as a strategist, I believe that the more strong candidates you have, the more excitement and interest you generate, and the more turnout you have in your primaries. So, you know, people have had to make their own individual choices. I mean, Haley Barbour, who spoke earlier today at the conference, I think Haley would have been a great candidate. But, you know, people decide not to run for various reasons, and sometimes they're very attractive. I mean, in '96, Colin Powell decided not to run, and in 2000, when George W. Bush ran, a lot of people decided not to run. So I think the field that we have is likely to be the final field.
Ralph Reed, always a pleasure to see you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for all you guys do at Newsmax.
Thank you for watching Newsmax TV.